Okay, good afternoon, Earth. This is Adam Sturch broadcasting from Garage Art today, working on oil painting. Here we are. Today, the first thing I want to do is redo her skin tones edge to edge on her surface area with a Naples yellow glaze to start modeling lights and darks after that's set, and mostly with this layer just to develop some nice thickness and light absorption across the texture. And then I'm going to take a light bright green and line in all of the scales, or start lining in the scales for the dragon, which will then be overlaid with translucent scenes as though the dragon itself were a path. But that's going to take a while to develop. So first things first, I'll start with the Naples yellow and modeling her skin a little more cleanly. Here we go. Oh shit, I don't knock my tripod over. Alright, there we go. Okay, there we go.
I heard whispers about financial support your government is from the drug industry. Well, the irony of this, of course, is that this money, which is in the billions, is coming from your country. See, you are the major purchaser of our national product, which is, of course, cocaine. On one hand, you're saying the United States government is spending millions of dollars to eliminate the flow of drugs onto our streets. At the same time, we are doing business with the very same government that is flooding our streets with cocaine. See, let me show you a few of the other characters that are involved in this right economy.
I'm on the border of Bolivia, working for pennies, treated like a slave. The coca fields have to be ready. The spirit of my people is starving, broken and sweaty, dreaming about revolution, looking at my machete. But the workload is too heavy to rise up in arms, and if I ran away, I know they'd probably murder my moms. So I pray to Jesucristo when I go to the mission, process the cocaine paste and play my position.
Okay, listen, while I'm out there, it's just getting my product before we chop off the hands. For workers' misconduct, I got the power to shoot a cop up and not get charged. It would be sad to see the family in front of a firing squad. So feed your kids, I need these bricks. 40 tons of total, let me test it indeed. Shit, this is good. Pass me a tissue and don't worry about them. I paid off their fee.
Yo, it don't come as a challenge. I'm the son of some of the phallus, elected by my people. The only one on the ballot, born and bred to consort with beds. I laugh at fate and assassinate my predecessor to have his place in a third world fashion state. Lock the nation with 90% of the wealth and 10% of the population. A Central Intelligence Agency takes weight faithfully. The finest type of China, white and cocaine, you'll see.
Money I'm home, never mind when your bank account suddenly broke. It's funny, we're so under this debt for this money we owe with you. When I told you that I had to, government's overthrown to keep my son enrolled in a private school and to keep my tummy swollen. Come on, I fucking home was building a foundation of bloody throats, a hungry stolen of their souls. Across this country's running coke. I took a stunning oath to hush the ones who know. The CIA conducts the flow for these young hustlers that lust for dough.
I go work in the hood, that's what's really good. It's supply work to the hood. These fools fucking crack me up, screwing out like the inferior. Petrified when we be in my area. My room is shoot till I say so. You have to loot, give me the yeah, like ice cubes. So don't just play with my head, yo. You don't stop you bastards. My street spam is chopping and backing. Taking pictures and tapping phones, the baby snitches and cracking codes. Pass the cup or blast the foe on any hustler stacking shoulders, pump the crack or blow. And my overtime is where your taxes go. Or gain your trust, get you the hand wave to us, cause we paid up front on the low with cameras taping you. Getting pop away, the prison sentence is due. Make the collar to leave with 2 keys. Out the evidence room with my brain. Trump on a plane, they watching you. You think you got work? They copping too. We control blocks, they lock countries and own companies. We had nice cars and sneaker money. Now it's players out there talking about they hoping. The bugs in their house like they down south with windows open. Window ain't wrong, wrong. You take shots and spoon. Better be up in your mouth like forks and spoons. So enjoy the rush, the pleasure of coke brand. Soon you'll be in the cell with me like Jenny Lopez. In school I was a bully, now life is fully a joke. I keep a float on the boat for Peruvian coke. Players do favors for governors and tax makers. Fat quakers smoke crack and sex act with bad manners. The walls got ears, big mouths probably scared. Not prepared to do years like Javier.
The story just told is an example of the path that drugs take on their way to every neighborhood in every state in this country. It's a lot deeper than the niggas on your block. So when they point the finger at you, brother man, this is what you gotta tell them.
I'm not guilty. You're the one who's guilty. Lawmakers, politicians, Colombian drug lords, all you who lobby against making drugs legal, just like you did with alcohol during Prohibition. You're the one who's guilty. I mean, come on, let's get realistic here. Ain't no Uzis made in Harlem. Not one of us in here owns a poppy field. This thing is bigger than immortal technique. This is big business. This is the American way.
Knowledge for the people and freedom meal.
Channel Live.
Freedom meal. Everywhere I look, there's another house Negro talking about their people and how they should be equal. They're talking about the conversation ain't going nowhere. You can't diss hip hop, so don't you even go there. See Dolores Tucker, you wanna quote the scripture? Every time you hear nigga, well listen up, sister.
I met up with this girl named Dolores, a prankster. I said I MC, she said you're a gangster, but she was caught up. She hit the floor like a break dance, wrapped her up like the arms in the B-boy's hands. Get up, honey, cause out here you get stormed. She said, where you from? I said I was born up in the South Bronx, but now I reside across America. She said, you the one who be causing all that mass hysteria.
Wisdom shall come out of the mouths of babes and something, but you blinded by cultural ignorance instead of judging. But judge not, lest he may be judged. For the judgment ye judge, ye shall surely be judged. You get still.
She said I liked it, that's why I jocked it. Then I said you only on my dick because I feel brothers' pockets. Cut the bullshit, take me to your past. She said I would give you the ass because I like the way your pants act. Spread her legs with the off the head, she do the kidney. Then I spread jism like graffiti on the titty. Freestyled all night, no doubt. That bitch couldn't get enough, cause she was strong the fuck. Yeah.
Electro, Atlantic equals Rio. Instead of fighting them, why don't you go free with Rio? Electro, Atlantic equals Rio. Instead of fighting them, why don't you go free with Rio?
Recital, I kicks the Bible like the final. Go as I watch, Babylon go as I bust them ball. Get that pig with that axe. So be dipped through the side, fucking cannon that back. Because he sent up the usage of the metaphor. You can get the tip of my dick raw. Because it's you that brings the real hardcore. Expenditures be getting cut through the wall.
Why, sure. Back before we were born, they sold us out here, J. Jackson. You know what you about. Back when you was running for the presidency and competing. All rap was dope, you loved every beating, but you took the beating. You was using us then, like you're using us now. And the National Army League don't know how. You figure, to stop the violence, we gave you 600,000, nigga. Now you quicker than this, I get with Miss Tucker. You better find another, you sell out motherfuckers.
Seem to be so rough, it could be the white owls. House niggas are full of shit like my golden towel. Kicking vowels is how we relieve the tension. But shit, we start to bounce white people like suspension. You made the bitch hits the black man on the corner, but tell me, who blew up Oklahoma? The city, ain't no pity. All the beats, it's I keep that voice from the east.
Electro, Atlantic equals Rio. Instead of fighting them, why don't you go free with Rio? Electro, Atlantic equals Rio. Instead of fighting them, why don't you go free with Rio? It sound like gunshots, but it could be the plug of a chicken. Definition is what you're missing, and listen to your children instead of dissing them. Senator Knowles doesn't understand the younger, like they be saying want to, but we be saying water. They get me down every summer as they walk the road, many because they cannot understand the code.
In actuality, this human-based mentality always seems to represent minus 360% on the degrees full circle, dead from the purple rays of the sun. I got smelling, so check it. Backing nuts quicker, get sick from being naked. Suspected, was it the means for the ends for just the beauty of a Benz? While you eat the big skins, turn you into mannequins. Is the trick of technology your revelation? Revelation, sensation gives me inspiration of revolution. That's my solution. There will be no sequels. I'm out 144,000 with my people. From Caligula to Hitler and now it's Schwarzenegger. A lust for the violence is the science of their behavior who enslaved you. But the God of virtue I see, you know the word created couldn't be mental side of me. Got my mind twisted like the veins of my sleep. I see this belief as he falls underneath. The rock, knock back the clock, cause I don't trust. The devil out of
Alright, that's a little better. That gives her skin tone a little more evenness and starts developing some light soak. So I'm going to cut it here and pick back up with maybe either highlights on her skin with some white while that's still wet, or move on to scales. I'm not quite certain yet. But next. Okay, I'm going to do a little highlighting before moving on.
That give us a certain view of ourselves, and a view of society, and a view of life, and a view of others. It doesn't mean that we actually have a spontaneous and free relationship to these questions of who are we anyway. It may be that we're very much also the products of social conditioning in a much more sophisticated and kind of spontaneous fashion than the characters in Aldous Huxley's novel. In an ant colony, interestingly enough, there's the queen, and then there are the worker ants. And the workers, and this is amazing to realize, genetically they are identical with the queen. The queen can ovulate, she's bigger, and she lives longer, but she's got the same genes as the worker ants. So what determines how those genes get triggered and expressed and activated has to do with the needs of the colony. So if you take the queen out of the colony, some of the worker ants will actually go to battle to become the queen. And the one that does then starts to ovulate. Their biology completely changes. And they'll be bigger and they'll live longer. So the biology of the queen is actually determined by the needs of the colony. Now, we're not as determined by group dynamics as ants are, and we're certainly genetically we're not identical like ants are, but this idea that we're sort of separate individuals fully in control of our destinies is really a myth. And the great trauma psychiatrist Bessel van der Kolk said that as much as we're told that we're separate individuals, we actually barely exist as individuals. And this goes back very much to ancient spiritual teachings, the difference being that the spiritual teachings have been validated now by modern science. So the idea that everything includes everything else is not a new concept. The Buddha said 2,500 years ago, consider the interconnected co-arising of all phenomena. He said, think of all the conditions that go into making a leaf or a raindrop. So, a leaf has in it the sun, the photosynthesis, the play of light, and the interaction of light with the chemistry of the plant. The leaf contains the earth in terms of minerals, and of course the sky, the water that makes up the substance of the leaf. So in that leaf, in a certain sense, the whole universe is united. And very much the same is true of all creatures in this universe, including human beings. And it's in the nature of human beings that we did not develop as isolated, individual, competitive, aggressive beings. In fact, had we been that way, we never would have evolved. We evolved very much in small band hunter-gatherer groups. I'm talking about going back millions of years now. And even if we just look at the existence of our own species, which has been on Earth for, I think, something like 150, 200,000 years, we lived in those small band collaborative groupings. If the existence of human beings as a species, or current species, Homo sapiens, can be expressed in 1 hour on a clock, then until 6 minutes ago, we lived out in nature in small band hunter-gatherer groups. Collaboratively, children were raised by a whole group, not by individuals, not by nuclearly isolated parents, single or a single couple in a distinct bungalow or apartment, but in a group setting. I'm not arguing for going back to those days. I'm just trying to understand what it is that activates human beings and what is it that makes us ill or what promotes our health. Now, if you want to study, you can say of an elephant, if you observe an elephant, you might say that the elephant is a solitary, lazy creature who basically lies down the whole day, and every once in a while gets up to eat something and maybe walks around a little bit, back and forth, and then lies down again. And that'd be true of the elephant in the zoo. But it's not true of the elephant in its natural state. So, to to make assumptions about human beings and how we are and who we are in the context of modern society is in a way like making conclusions about an elephant in a zoo. Far divorced from our natural origins and following pathways and practices and holding beliefs and values that are very different under which we actually evolved as a species. Now, it's not that anybody wants to or would want to go back to hunter-gatherer days, but it is a matter of recognizing what maybe we've lost in the process. And the question is, can we use our ingenuity, our creativity, our incredible technical knowledge, our inventiveness for the benefit not just of relentless progress in a very narrow technological, economic sense, which progress, by the way, as we know in today's world, is leaving a lot of people behind. To look at figures in Britain about rising poverty, for example. But even if we assume that this continuous progress, at what price? And is it possible to use that same ingenuity, creativity, and progress not to lose and leave behind those values that actually help humans become humans, but to somehow reconcile modern living with those ancient values of connection and belonging. And belonging is not a minor issue. Loneliness, for example, extreme loneliness has been shown to be as much of a risk factor for illness as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. That's significant. And in the modern world, there's been an epidemic of loneliness to the point that at some point here in Britain, they appointed a minister for loneliness just to try to try and mitigate some of the impact of the loneliness that modern society has created. When you look at the statistics, more and more people are feeling lonely. This is rising decade by decade by decade, which brings me to the point of my subtitle in this book, The Myth of Normal. I've already addressed that one. The false equation with what is the norm, with healthy and natural. But the subtitle is Trauma, Illness, and Healing in a Toxic Culture. And the question of the toxicity of a culture is very simple. To what degree does it meet the needs of human beings? And to what degree does it perhaps undermine the genuine needs of human beings? And that then brings me back to the question of human nature. Well, is there a human nature then that we can actually say this is human nature in terms of this is behavior is representative of human nature and that behavior is not? Well, the answer is there's no such rigid definition of human nature that you can possibly apply. Because if you think of the existence of a Buddha or a Jesus or the existence of a Hitler or a Stalin, I could give other names that are more modern, but I'll leave modern politics aside to save people tender prejudice, just to protect people's tender prejudices. But the point is, if a Buddha and a Jesus can be human beings, and so can a Hitler and a Stalin, then what does that say about human nature? Which is human nature? The fact is, neither is human nature. We cannot talk about human nature in a fixed, rigid sense. What we can talk about, though, is what creates a Stalin, what creates a Hitler, what creates a Buddha, what creates a Jesus. We can talk about that. And when we talk about that, what we're really talking about is what are the needs of human beings and what conditions are necessary for the development of human beings who are self-aware and compassionate, and what conditions support the development of human beings who are utterly egomaniacally selfish and self-centered and utterly brutal. So we cannot talk about human nature as such. As a matter of fact, the neuroscientist Robert Sapolsky at Stanford University has said that the nature of our nature is not to be particularly constrained by our nature. That's our nature. is not to be constrained by our nature. We're infinitely adaptive creatures. We can adapt, as the Tolstoy quote indicates, we can adapt to almost anything. Now, adaptations can be very healthy, or they can be healthy in a particular context and unhealthy in a different context. Which is where I'd like to say a moment about something about this whole question of genetics and illness, and genetics and human behavior in general. You know, there's been a modern trend to find a gene for anything. You know, some comic wrote about 30 years ago, they're finding a gene for everything. A gene for line dancing, a gene for liking British food, you know, a gene for everything. But the reality is when you actually examine, and President Clinton, when he announced the Genome Project, he promised the world that through these genes, we're going to find a language of life. And we're going to find out exactly why people get diabetes, why they get Alzheimer's, why they get everything, and we'll be able to prevent and treat these conditions. That was back around 2000 or 1999, something like that, I think. Well, we found out since then that we haven't found anything of the sort. The Genome Project has yielded virtually zero in terms of the prevention of human illness. And why is that? Because genes don't determine a whole lot in terms of human behavior or human health. There are some diseases that are specifically genetic. One runs in my family, it's muscular dystrophy. If you inherit the gene, like my mother and my aunt did, then you're going to have the disease. But those diseases that are genetically determined are extremely rare. And most conditions that beset human beings are either, most of them are not at all genetically determined, and even those that have some genetic predisposition, that predisposition still depends on the environment to trigger them or not to. So you can take something like breast cancer in women. There's some breast cancer genes. If you inherit the gene, your risk of getting that disease is much higher than the average. But out of 100 women with breast cancer, only 7 carry the gene. 93 do not. Out of 100 women with the gene, not all of them will get the disease. No, they're much higher risk, no question about it. It just means that, for the most part, genes don't determine illnesses. What then does? And by the way, this is true for whether we're talking about most physical illnesses and mental illnesses. So to talk about genetics is kind of a lazy person's way of trying to explain something, because scientifically, there's very little basis to it. So, for example, all these genetically determined mental health conditions, they say about ADHD, which is something I've written about after my own diagnosis in my 50s, that it's the most heritable mental illness there is. Well, as I say in this book, to say that ADHD is the most heritable mental illness is like saying that quartz is the most chewable crystal. Because it's not true. It's neither a disease nor is it genetic. Nobody's ever found a single gene that determines any mental health condition. Nobody's ever found a group of genes that determine any mental health condition. Nobody has ever found a group of genes that if you don't have them, you will not have a certain mental health conditions. There are a large group of genes that the more of them you have, the more you risk, the more at risk you are for any number of mental health conditions, but no specific ones. Which means that the genes cannot cause the disease, because if they did, when they showed up, so should the disease in every case, but it doesn't. And you can have the same disease, or if you want to call it that, but even without the genes. Because the fact is, scientifically speaking, that genes are turned on and off by the environment. So it's a question of what kind of environment is acting on certain genes that will promote one kind of development or a less healthy kind of development. And that again comes back to the social context. That it's in a social context, in our set of relationships with our parents, beginning in utero, where the emotional stresses on the mother will already have an impact on the developing brain of the child and the physiology of the child, the birth process, the birthing process, the child-rearing environment. These are the conditions under which we develop in healthy ways or we don't. And my argument is that in this culture, it's increasingly a toxic environment that distorts human development. So if you want to understand why more and more kids are being diagnosed with everything under the sun and being medicated for it, for that matter, or if you want to understand why there's a rising, inexplicable rising tide of childhood suicides in the United States, about which there's a lot of hand-wringing, but very little insight. Well, if you want to understand the New York Times article that 6 weeks ago revealed that there's one teenager who's on 10 different psychiatric medications. 10 different? They should maybe be on one, if at all. 10 different psychiatric medications. Well, what accounts for the rising tide of addictions or autoimmune disease? Either you assume that these are all genetic conditions, which, by the way, even on the face of it cannot be true because genes don't change in a population over 10, 15, 20, 30, or 100 years. So if something is rising, whatever's doing it, it cannot be genetic. If the rate of multiple sclerosis, the gender ratio, which in the 1930s used to be close to 1-to-1 between males and females, is now more than almost 3.5 women to every man, whatever's causing it, it can't be genes. There's nothing that determines that it should be that way. So you can make 3 assumptions. Either these are genetic conditions, which they're not, or we can assume that these are random, inexplicable events, misfortunes that somehow strike people for no reason whatsoever that we can discern, which is basically the medical understanding, because we call these conditions idiopathic, like autoimmune conditions and so on. Idiopathic means we don't know what causes it. Or we can say, well, maybe there's something in the environment that is triggering the onset of all these conditions of ill health that show up in mind and body. And if since the numbers of these conditions is rising and the number of people being affected by it is rising, then just as in a laboratory, if you're growing organism in a lab culture and many of them got ill, you'd have to say this is a toxic culture. There's something about this culture that's making the creatures that live in it sick. I'm making the same argument about the culture that we're living in today. I mentioned the multiple sclerosis. In 1870 or so, or 1860 perhaps, the French neurologist Jean-Martin Charcot, who first described the condition, said in so many words, well, I'm paraphrasing, but basically, that this is a stress-driven condition. He said this 150 years ago. Sir William Osler, the Canadian physician, knighted by Queen Victoria, I think he taught at Oxford. He also was one of the founding physicians at Johns Hopkins in the United States. He said that rheumatoid arthritis was a stress-driven condition. In 1870, the New York Times, about 6 months ago, had an article. They'd done some study that showed that women with breast cancer, the more depressed they were, the worse their prognosis was. In other words, there was a relationship between the emotional state of the woman and the outcome of her illness. And the New York Times thought this was amazing news. Except for the fact, when you look at the medical literature, in 1870, for God's sakes, there was a British surgeon called James Paget who said the same thing. But the difference is that from the time that Jean-Martin Charcot made his observations and William Osler made his, and James Paget observed what he observed, at that time there was no research to back it up. There was no research either to show the correlationship between stress and trauma and adult illness, or illness in general, nor was there research, nor was there the scientific knowledge to explain the physiological pathways between stress, emotional difficulties, and physiological illness. They were just dependent on science. No, we do. We've had multiple studies now to show the relationship between stress and trauma and multiple sclerosis. We've had multiple studies showing the same relationship between these same conditions and rheumatoid arthritis, or for example, malignancy. A study came out of Harvard 3 years ago, I think, that showed that women with severe post-traumatic stress disorder have double the risk of ovarian cancer. Now, if that was the only study ever done, it should have sent every physician running to figure out what's going on here. What's the relationship between an individual's emotional states and their trauma and their physical health? But you know what? The study barely registered on the medical radar. And you'll never go to a gynecologist and be asked what happened to you. Endometriosis, a condition of women that has to do with uterine tissue showing up in parts of the abdomen where it doesn't belong. It's a painful condition.
All right, that gets some shadow and dark, shadow and light, developing a little bit on top of the fresh glaze, and some nice detailed color beginning to happen throughout.
But you go to a gynecologist, nobody's going to ask you what you're
So from here, gotta let that set up for a minute and then work scales. So next take.
Society of Addiction Medicine.
All right. The next step, I'm going to take a Prussian blue mixture with a little bit of madder carmine, make it very deep, bluish violet, and reinforce depth of the darkness of her hair. And then I mix up some light inky green to start doing the scale line work. So here we go.
Drugs. So the first thing you have to realize is, when we talk about addiction, we're not just talking about drugs. It can obviously apply to, first of all, cigarettes, which you might say is a drug, but also eating, shopping, gambling, work, sex, internet, compulsive internet watching, compulsive video gaming, any human being. The issue is not the target behavior, the issue is, does it provide temporary pleasure and relief at the cost of long-term consequences, and do you find it difficult to give up? So given that definition, let me ask you a question here in this room, and just raise your hands please if the answer is yes. I'm not going to ask you anything about details, just by that definition, how many of you will acknowledge that at some time or another you had some kind of an addictive pattern in your life? Just raise your hands. Okay, great. That's how widespread addictions are. So the first point is, when we talk about the addicts, let's just get realistic about it. Number one. Number two, I'm going to ask you a question now. I'm not going to ask you what you're addicted to, when, or for how long. I'm just going to ask you, what did it do for you? What did you like about it? What did it give you in the short term? So if you have just those who are willing to say, just raise your hand and tell me. Anybody? What did it do for you? Yes, at the very right there. Escape from suffering. Escape from emotional pain. Yes. Somebody else? Relief from stress, or escape from pain, stress relief. Anybody else? Yes. A fantasy of control, a sense of control, right? Very good. Thank you. Yes. Relief from depression, okay, very good. We'll take one more, yes please. Avoids emotional discomfort, okay, good. So, was that pleasure? Well, very good. So, let's just establish something. The addiction wasn't your problem. The addiction was your attempt to solve a problem. So it's nonsense to call it a primary brain disease. The real question is, why did you each of you have so much emotional distress or pain that you had to escape from it? And why is it that you didn't know how to deal with the pain? Because life brings pain, right? Part of being a human being is knowing how to deal with the pain. Why did you have so much stress that you had to find relief from it, and why were you not able to manage the stress in a more creative and less harmful way? Why did you not have a sense of agency and control in your life? Why on God's green earth did you lack for pleasure? Now these will not be explained by references to choices or genes. These will be explained by looking at your life. Something happened. And it's that something that happened that we have to look at. So what happened? Now the only way to understand human beings, well, let me read you a quote here from somebody knew what he was talking about a long time ago.
Extend that.
This is the Buddha talking about the nature of reality. And he says that everything is interconnected. Big news, right? He says, and he called that the interconnected co-arising of phenomena. So, mouthful, it just means that everything arises in connection to everything else. Contemplate, he says, the nature of interconnected co-arising during every moment. In other words, always look at the whole picture, the gestalt, the unity, the connections, to understand anything. When you look at the leaf or a raindrop, meditate on all the conditions, near and distant, that have contributed to the presence of that leaf or raindrop. Well, think of that raindrop, or that leaf. It contains the sun, right? Photosynthesis. Contains the earth, the minerals, contains the sky, the water. It's not an individual entity. The birth and death of any phenomenon are connected to the birth and death of all other phenomena. The one contains the many, and the many contains the one. Without the one, there cannot be the many. Without the many, there cannot be the one. Now, to put that in modern medical terms, we talk about the biopsychosocial nature of human beings. Biopsychosocial means that you cannot separate people's biology from their psychology, their emotions, and from their social relationships. Nothing exists, no phenomena exists in isolation from other phenomena. And let me give you an example. It's nothing to do with addictions. A study in the United States last year showed that if you're a black woman, the more experiences of racism you have to endure, the greater your risk of asthma. Many other studies have shown that the more stressed the parents are, the more likely their kids to have asthma. But these studies have been repeated, they're not controversial, but I know from experience that if you ask the average medical school class, or the average physician for that matter, to explain the physiology behind it, let alone what to do with it, they wouldn't know what to say. Because our education just focuses on the biological. We don't look at the psychological, emotional, and social as they affect the biology. Now, it's very simple physiologically. Anybody here ever been treated for asthma? Anybody here? Yeah? What did they give you, remember? Albuterol on steroids, thank you very much. So albuterol is an inhaler that opens up the narrowed airways, and steroids suppress the inflammation in the airways. Now, albuterol is a copy of adrenaline. The steroids are a copy of cortisol. What are adrenaline and cortisol? Anybody know? Stress hormones. In other words, we're treating asthma with stress hormones. Should it maybe not occur to us that stress has something to do with the onset of that condition? By the way, steroids are the commonest used medication all across medicine. We use the stress hormone in virtually every condition of the deal that has to do with inflammation. It should tell us something about the nature of inflammation in its relation to stress. And there's a lot of research on that, it's not even controversial. So for example, people that had suffered started stress and abuse have higher risk of inflammation as adults. Why? Because human beings, and therefore they have higher risk of heart disease and cancer and other diseases. Straightforward relationship. Because you can't separate the biology from the psychology and from the social relationship. It's the same in addiction. So what I'm saying is that to understand addiction fully, we have to have a perspective that's not to do with choices, which is utter nonsense. I don't know a single person who ever chose to be an addict, who ever woke up one morning and said, my ambition is to be an addict. If anybody here chose to be an addict, please raise your hand right now and tell me why you did that. And we have to get beyond the disease model. And again, as I said, to do that, we have to look at people's lives in the context of their psychological and social relationships. Because yes, addiction does involve the brain, and we can show in brain scans that there are abnormalities in the certain key circuits in the addicted brain, which is, by the way, not just restricted to drugs. So there's abnormal functioning in any addiction. Therefore, to isolate drug addiction and say, well, that's the problem. Yeah, it is a problem. But it's not the problem. And it's not separable from the general problem of addiction in society. So, it's not the primary problem, it's the attempt to solve a problem. What to understand is how did that problem arise. Well, let's just go this layer by layer. As I say in my book, if you understand addiction, you just can't take any one single perspective. You have to look at the whole picture, and you have to kind of shake it up like a kaleidoscope to see it from many different perspectives. So, let's look at the next level. First level is the attempt to solve a life problem. Now, as a Hungarian-born, like myself, psychiatrist Thomas Horler said, all addictions are an attempt to control our life experiences by external remedies. He said, the meaning of all addictions could be defined as endeavors at controlling our life experiences with the help of external remedies. Unfortunately, all external means of improving our life experiences are double-edged swords. They're always good and bad. No external remedy improves our condition without at the same time making it worse. So that's the first level. It's an attempt to somehow controlling your life experience, which is what we established. On the second level, let's look at it from a more narrowly medical perspective. So I was diagnosed with ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, in my 50s. I was a successful doctor, a family physician. I was the head of palliative care at Vancouver's largest hospital. I wrote a national medical column. How can this guy have ADD? Well, you could do that if you came to my room and saw the mess in my room, the disorder in my personal life, my poor impulse control, my lateness, my disorganization, my frustration, I'm not having fulfilled my potential. Very typical ADD outcomes. The difficulties in my marriage, the troubles with my children. So, I was diagnosed and described, well, let me pause here for a minute. So again, the ADD is defined as this inherited brain disease. Utter nonsense. It's neither inherited nor is it disease. I'll tell you what it is. It's not unlike addiction in that sense. The hallmark of ADD is this tuning out the absent-mindedness, the problem, difficulty, as your current president demonstrates very saliently, difficulty holding to a single thought, in extreme cases, which he represents, by the way. Inattention. He's never read a book in his whole life. Now, in his biographer is describing as flitting about like a butterfly, one thing to another. That tuning out, that absent-mindedness, what is that about? Why do we have that capacity? Because it's a human capacity that we all have. Why do we have it? What's its function? Anybody? Yeah. Trying to forget something? Close. It's not so much trying to forget it. Go ahead. In what sense? How does it help you survive? Okay, go ahead. Okay, so first of all, you have to have selective attention. You can't be attending right now to every sensation. Your brain is getting millions of bits of data from your viscera every split second. You can't be attending to them all. So there has to be selective attention. That's one function of it. But there's another one, which goes back more to what somebody else said, forgetting difficult things. It's not about forgetting difficult things, it's enduring difficult things. If I were to stress you right, any one of you right now, let's say, Patty, if I were to stress you right now, become abusive towards you, just verbally, what would be your options? What would you do? Somebody help her out. What would be the options? Yeah? Go ahead. You can just run away. You just get out of the room. Right? I'm not going to sit here listening to this guy assault me or everybody like that. I'm getting out of here. That's one option, right? What's another one? Sorry? You could confront me. You could fight back. So flight or fight. Exactly. There's a third option. If you couldn't engage either one, but given that there were... No, you don't have to go there just yet. You don't have to go to Fiji just yet. There are several dozen people here in the room with you. What else could you do? You can ask for help. Now, you can ask for help. But what if you couldn't escape, fight back, or ask for help, but the situation didn't give you those options? Now what would you do? You wouldn't do anything. Your brain would do something. You'd disassociate, so that you wouldn't be overwhelmed. So it's a coping mechanism for stress, is what it is. Now how it becomes a medical condition, I'll tell you about it in a little while. But it's meant to be a temporary thing, not a long-term thing. So the problem happens when coping mechanisms that are meant to be there temporarily become long-term. In other words, where they go from being a temporary state to a long-term trait. Let me quote you from an article published by the American Academy of Pediatrics in the journal Pediatrics, which is their official journal. The article is from the Harvard Center on the Developing Child, published in 2012. It's one of these seminal articles that's published in a major journal and makes no impact whatsoever on medical practice. So here's what they say. Growing scientific evidence demonstrates that social and physical environments that threaten human development because of scarcity, stress, or instability can lead to short-term physiologic and psychological adjustments that are necessary for immediate survival and adaptation, but which may come at a significant cost to long-term outcomes in learning, behavior, health, and longevity. In other words, the way that young children adapt to stress in their environment helps them endure that stress, but the same coping mechanisms because of pathology, learning problems, and health problems later on. And that's just the question, how does that happen? And what conditions engender those coping mechanisms? So in any case, I was diagnosed with ADHD, and I was prescribed dexedrine, which is a stimulant, which elevates the level of a chemical in the brain called dopamine. That really helped me. I became a much more efficient workaholic for several years. And it helped me write a couple of my books. Didn't do anything for me in terms of personal development, but it certainly helped me get things done.
It's going to be wonky.
Now, what else elevates dopamine levels? Well, all the stimulants do. Now I'll be talking about dopamine level. Cocaine does, crystal meth does, nicotine does, caffeine does. So I was talking to somebody at lunchtime today who told me that in the late days people use cocaine. Instead of getting more hyper, like a lot of people do, they calm down. They get things done. When somebody tells you that, what are they telling you? They're telling you, first of all, they're handing you the diagnosis on the platter. They're saying, I got ADD. And about 30% of stimulant addicts, according to the studies, are actually self-medicating ADHD. And what I'm saying about addictions is, very often they're self-medication. Self-medication. And it doesn't have to be with drugs. Because when I had my addictive behaviors, really, in the midst of those behaviors, I was very focused and present. No ADD then at all. My memory was perfect because of those activities. Also, so, self-medication. People self-medicate ADHD with pot, with cannabis, because it calms the hyperactive brain, or with alcohol. People self-medicate anxiety with cannabis, with opiates, and with tranquilizers. People self-medicate depression. Cocaine, like Prozac, elevates serotonin levels in the brain temporarily. So people self-medicate depression with addictions. People self-medicate social phobia. People self-medicate post-traumatic stress disorder, salient with the opiates, which is why a lot of the veterans coming back from the crusades around the world self-medicate with opiates. And when that happens, there goes honor our young men and women, honor our heroes. What they do is they get jailed. Pretty badly treated. So it's a self-medication for post-traumatic stress disorder, relieving the symptoms temporarily. So on the second level then, addictions are very often about self-medications. And if that's the case, you've got to be dealing with what they're self-medicating, not just with the behavior of addiction. Now, let's go deeper. Let's look at the brain and addiction. So, we mentioned the opiates as a self-medication for PTSD and other conditions. Why do the opiates work in the human brain anyway? Like, why does this product from Afghanistan, by the way, I should tell you, just a fact here. I'm not here to talk politics, I'm just telling facts. Since the Western-led, the US-led war in Afghanistan, the production of opium has gone up exponentially. Congratulations and thank you very much. That's just the reality. Now, why do the opiates even work in the human brain? Anybody know? Yeah? Yeah, well, you're sort of meandering in the right ballpark, but you're not quite there. Yeah. We have our own opiate system. We have our own opiate system. And so that means that we have molecules in our cell surfaces where the opiate molecule can bind. Because the opiate resembles our internal opiate sufficiently that the cell doesn't know the difference. So we have receptors for them. And in fact, the internal opiate systems are called, internal opiates are called endorphins. And endorphin literally means endogenous morphine-like substance. That's what endorphin is. So why do we have an internal endorphin system? Well, we've used opiates in medicine for at least 2,000 years, probably longer. For what? What does it say?
Difficult until I get to go right here.
So when I was working in palliative care, every day.
Oh, we got 6 minutes left on this
for
clip.
the opiates. Because without them, a lot of people would die in excruciating pain from cancer and other terminal conditions. But the opiates do not only soothe physical pain, they also soothe emotional pain. As a matter of fact, the same brain center that experiences the suffering of physical pain also experiences the suffering of emotional pain. There's a difference in pain and suffering. I go to the dentist, and unless it's something radical like a root canal, I don't get my teeth frozen. My dentist is always nervous. He wants to give me an injection, and I hate that feeling of being frozen. I said, Vince, I can handle the pain. So I can have pain, but I'm not suffering. Why am I not suffering? Because I know that it's for good purpose. I know that I'm in good hands. I know that I can stop at any time. And I will be over soon. There's no suffering. There's pain, but there's no suffering. So the suffering of physical pain is experienced in the same brain center as the suffering of emotional pain. As a matter of fact, as many of you have already said when you told me about your addictive patterns, most addictions are actually all addictions. Distract. If they don't directly soothe pain like the opiates do, they distract from it. Alcohol. What do you say about somebody who's drunk too much? Old expression. Oh, that feeling, no pain. Cannabis has got analgesic qualities, you know. Cocaine is a local anesthetic. It soothes nerve endings. Which means to say, and this is my mantra, you recall nothing else, you might hold on to this one. The first question in addiction is not why the addiction, but why the pain. And if you understand people's pain, don't look at their genes. Look at their lives. What happened to them? Something happened. Now, why do we have an endorphin system? Well, they play many functions in the body, from the gut to the mucous membrane to the immune system. But in the brain, as related to addiction, they serve three major functions. Number one, pain relief. And throughout the body, pain relief. You have to have pain relief. You have to have pain to survive. You also have to have pain relief. So the endorphins are responsible for the so-called placebo effect. You think you're getting help? You give 100 people a pain pill who are in pain, 25 will find relief because their own system will release endorphins in response to the belief that they're getting help. It's not an imagined effect, it's a genuine physiological effect on account of the endorphins. So they provide pain relief. That's one thing they do. Secondly, they account for the experience of pleasure and reward, elation, joy. Whenever you got those emotional states, you got a lot of endorphin activity in your brain. That's the second function. The third function is actually the most important one.
All right, that's looking a lot cleaner as far as the figure goes. And that starts a toe hold in the line work for the scaling, which will take quite some time. And it's pretty hot in here right now. I need to bring in another fan. I got one, but it was really nice, so I'm keeping it for the home studio. And I don't want to bring it in here, so I guess I'll just suffer. I'll find a cheap one to bring in here as well. But I'm broke now because of the nice one that I already bought. That I'm willing to take in. So anywho, that is my fan drama for the moment. But the scales are looking better, she's looking better, modeling, skin tone, layering, light absorption starting to develop. So I'm going to pause it here and we'll come back to more scales in a little while. Okay, I just did a whole session up top there and hit the wrong button. So I didn't record the session. That sucks. That's okay. It's just a little toe hold in what's going to be going on in the black hole. So now I'm going to get back down over here to scales.
I think they're overstating it. In any addiction, the very idea of participating in the behavior already gets the dopamine pulses flowing. So in the depths of my shopping addiction.
Okay. So anyway, now moving on to scales.
The anticipation itself will already make me feel alive. It wasn't illegal, but it was illicit in the sense that I was lying to my wife about it.
After this.
So yeah, there's something to that. What we know is in Portugal, where they've decriminalized the personal possession of drugs, drug use has gone down a little bit. A lot more people are in treatment. Now, it's not, the problem with addiction is people are ashamed of it and they're usually lying about it. So it's illicit in the sense even if it's not illegal. It's not the criminality that they were after, it's the illicitness that they were after.
Well, in a sense, some of the patients in land would say, the city of Miami would go out of business if the cops weren't getting paid off and judges. So there's big money.
Which is my point, so that when people say the war on drugs is a failure, no it isn't. The war in Iraq was only a failure if you really think that it was about what it was about. Then it was a failure. What was it about? What if, but not, it wasn't a failure for everybody. A lot of people made a lot of money off it. The military got a lot of budget out of it. It's the same with the war on drugs. Some people are some people are succeeding beautifully as a result of the war on drugs. Yes.
It's just a comment, but the group that I work for at the hospital, we walked away from a grant, applying for a grant from the state of New Hampshire because, and it was with pregnant and parenting women who were in addiction or, in medically assisted treatment. And they wanted them in their own house or apartment that they were paying for fully themselves and with a job, with kids or a new baby or something within 6 months. And we just had to walk back and say, it's an ethical issue. We do not believe that this is, and when you talk about the stress, I'm like, the stress we would have put on those mothers. If we had taken that money and insisted that we would have had failure all over the place and babies failing. And this was, the state thought that was a good idea. So.
Any other questions now? Yes.
I wonder if you could speak a little bit about enabling, just the stigma against enablers and how that fits into the conversation.
So what is enabling? Because everybody uses that word differently, so how are you using it?
I have a friend who is an addict and he comes to drink with me, and for months I didn't know that he was trying to quit. And
now that you do?
And now that I do, I'm in a position of having to make a rule or not make a rule or decide it's okay for you to be in this vulnerable place with me, even though our other friends don't want you to be in that place. And my other friends consider me as an enabler because I might not be drawing the same lines and making the same rules that they are.
Yeah. That's a tough one. In general, I think, if you're going to make an error on the side of compassion. You didn't make him into a drinker. You're not going to stop him from being a drinker. But it's a question of what's it like for you? What is it like for you, being with him when he's drinking and you know that it's bad for him? What's it like for you?
I prefer to see him as a human being, and that if this is what makes him feel like a human being when he's with me, then I would rather put him in a place where he can feel safe addressing the pain that he feels and not fear that I'm going to do.
Okay. Well, that's not even to make a mistake. It's all about that. You're not even causes alcoholism and you're not going to stop it. He can, and maybe if he gets some compassionate friendship. And that's, however, you gotta watch that one. Because you might raise a veer into caretaking and kind of, that's enabling. And you'll be doing that at your own expense. So you gotta really, as long as you're really clear on that one, where you're coming from, I won't argue with you. But there's a bit of a line there you have to draw. Okay? Yes, over there, go ahead. Yeah. Can you speak up a bit?
Right, one of the causes of addiction and trauma you described is sort of behavior and destructive issues.
Yeah.
Whether or not, really this kind of is really hard to address. of policy.
Yeah.
Branching those two facts is policies.
So the question is that these are big structural questions, so how do you address them? Is that the issue?
Or the causes are structural.
Yes.
Structural issues and policies
Yeah.
are in this country. At what level the policy
Okay, so as I'm understanding the question, the problems that I'm describing are structural, they're part of the culture. At what level can we address them? Well, look, in Canada, I'm happy to say that the health minister, the federal health minister, is tweeting out my book all the time. And it's quoting it, which is a great step forward. I don't expect that to happen in your administration right now. I mean, we're rapidly taking giant steps backward right now. You address it at whatever level you're functioning at. So, on the local level, for example, it's nuts that you don't have supervised injection sites here. But, with all the heroin deaths, why aren't there in some of the larger centers places where people can actually bring their drugs with clean needles, sterile water, tourniquet, and get resuscitated if they overdose? Why not? So harm reduction. In Vancouver, we have a clinic where people who can't use methadone or Suboxone, which just doesn't work for them, actually get heroin prescribed to them. Now that means they're not going to die in the street of a fentanyl overdose. They're not buying some adulterated stuff that somebody's spiked with fentanyl. So, whatever level that you're at, you just deal with what the problems immediately in front of you. People should have much more access to methadone. Low threshold access to Suboxone and methadone. Treatment policy should incorporate anybody who's going to deal with addiction at all needs to be trained in trauma, at least understanding trauma. They're not. So there's multiple level approaches depending on where you're working and if you're a policymaker, but for God's sakes, get educated. Base your policies on evidence. There's all kinds of evidence about treatment and harm reduction and criminalization and what works and what doesn't. But the last thing that politicians ever look at is the evidence. So just whatever level you're at, just do what you can. That's all I can say. I don't know if I'm answering your question, but that's the best I can come up with. Maybe else. Yes. Yeah, well, so treatment. So if I was running a treatment facility, first of all, no one size fits all. So the 12 step screws, great for what? 15-20% of that. But great, 15-20% is really good. But there's no one size that, so first of all, nobody should be coerced into treatment. Nobody should be forced into 12 step treatment. That's never how it was designed. You can't force somebody to admit that they're powerless. It's utterly meaningless. You're just making them powerless even more when you do that. Harm reduction should be a part of it because, again, no one size fits all. So some people, okay, right now, like this person says, where you're at right now, there's so much pain in your life, you don't know what to do with it, you're going to use something. That's what you're going to do. That's at least make it as safe for you as possible. That does not encourage anybody to stay or become addicted. It's utter nonsense. You want all the studies. Okay. It's very helpful. Now, if you're a treatment facility, the treatment, first of all, once you're detoxed, so what? You get somebody, even if you can get somebody off heroin, now they're detoxed and you kick them back into society. You haven't taught them a thing. You haven't helped them develop as a human being. You haven't taught them skills. You haven't helped them deal with their trauma, their self-loathing, their shame, their pain. And they throw back out, what's going to happen? They're going to relapse. So treatment facilities need to, once you get somebody off that drug, even while they're still using the same methadone, start dealing with the other issues, the trauma that drove it in the first place, the lack of social skills, get them out into nature, get them out on the land, get them cultivating a garden, give them a sense of meaning and purpose. Of community and communality. A lot of compassion, a lot of patience, a lot cheaper than what we're doing right now. Yes?
Can you give some talking points here? Talk about one effective method is prenatal and early childhood. So, kind of how do you flip the conversation to how to treat an adult addict to where a nation needs to go with policy that would prevent addiction?
Well, for one thing, you have to get civilized first. Gandhi was once asked about what he thinks about Western civilization. He said, I think it'd be a good idea. And same with the U.S. You're barbaric when it comes to child policy. Your 6 weeks maternity leave, biologically, it's a scandal. Biologically, that kid should be with the mother for at least 9 months, probably for 18 or 24 months. Daily, full time. Or a mother and parent of either gender, or any gender for that matter. So, first of all, support for prenatal women. Dealing with their stresses, not just talking about blood tests and ultrasounds, but actually what's happening in your life. Then, birth practices that traumatize infants, the medicalization of birth, the high cesarean section rate, all that stuff. We'll be going on about that. Then, if you're going to have kids in daycare, if the parents have to work, make sure the daycare, remember that this Harvard article says that the brain develops from before birth to adulthood. That means that the daycares and the schools and the kindergartens need to be in the brain development business. And what is the necessary condition for brain development? Responsive adults. Now, as in one of my books, Hold On To Your Kids, we point out, my co-writer and I in that book, children just need to attach. They just do. They can't function without it. So does a duckling. Duckling hatches from the egg, imprints on the mother duck, if she's there. But what will the duckling imprint on if the mother duck is not there? Anything that moves, including a toy, which developmentally is a disaster because the toy can't bring up that duckling. Now, what do we do with our kids? Throwing them into these daycares with poorly paid, undertrained staff? They don't see the parents the whole day. Who are they around the whole day? Other kids. Who do they imprint on? Other kids. Now you've got this ridiculous peer culture where kids are more related to each other than they are to adults. And you've given them technology to keep it that way. So they go on Facebook where they have friends and where people like them. In other words, they're getting their attachment needs pseudo-met. Pseudo-met because nobody on Facebook really knows them. They just know the image that they portray. So we gotta get real about human needs. And it would cost so much less than what we're spending now. So, if you're interested in those issues, I do suggest you check out all my books. I only got 4 of them, so it's not terribly expensive, but particularly Hold On To Your Kids. And also my book on ADHD, which talks a lot about child development. But, pay attention to this Harvard article that was published 5 years ago. There's lots of information. Shonkoff, S-H-O-N-K-O-F, and a bunch of others. Jenny ready to go. Yes.
This is a messy question. You can address it if you want.
Yeah.
The ACE study, as I read it, was stumbled across.
What?
It was stumbled upon, this phenomenon. It was treating obese people.
It was something like
And what happened was, these people would lose weight,
Yeah.
and then they would gain weight again.
That's
They
right.
couldn't figure it out until we sat down and talked to them, and it turned out that all the women had consecutive use of children.
Yeah.
All the men had had trauma.
That's a
Women were medicating by eating a lot, not just because it was comforting, but because they wanted to be invisible to attackers, to people who might rape them. And then that began the AIDS study.
Okay, cutting it here for a few minutes. It's hot.
Tour to Germany.
Okay, it's rolling.
A year ago.
Oh,
and we were.
I'm gonna pop this off the tripod.
Some people.
And I have realized I'm too hot to continue anything else right now.
And you know, that sort of thing.
Oh, I need another fan.
And there in a restaurant when I was eating a sandwich before.
But anyway, that gets a toe hold in the scales.
People.
And it's going to get more difficult as I work the bends of each line
so we
of
need
the
to get here
dragon there. But that gets it started and also gets his head rendered a little bit.
Backstage before.
Kind of like his expression.
And we both agree that
I get some work done on her.
Tonight has been said.
Looking better with the light and shadow. A little more dimensional.
All those high moments in human history when those who have gone within and understood about the brain and the inner treasures.
But this has a long way to go. With the cross contouring and the layering of glazes is starting to set it up for some nice light absorption as well. And also started the black hole interior, which I apologize for missing, but I hit the wrong button, and there you have it.
Up to date.
Anyway, I won't be too noticeable in the overall process video, I don't believe. Other than that, I am here at Garage Art. This is Taos, New Mexico, broadcasting in between Outback Pizza and Allsup's, with a lot of people from Lubbock passing by. Not much sales today. Or not any people, I should say. Sales are few and far between right now in World War III. And I just realized my aperture completely blew out of the water trying to show you what's going on outside. So I'll just stick to inside and pan around the studio a little bit.
Chatting it, raving it, ranting it.
Supposed to get some rain, so I brought my paintings inside. I hope they are correct in that because it's fucking hot. I need to bring in another fan, but I think I already said that. It's on my mind if you can't tell. Anyway, lots of cool stuff here. Garage Art, soon to have a new name, separate shop going on in it. It's possible there'll be some silversmithing and some other interesting things going on around here. So if you need some weird art, I have plenty. Thank you for watching, everyone. That's Adam Sturch broadcasting from Garage Art, Taos, New Mexico. Working on oil painting, here we are. I'll be back with you on this one tomorrow, but I'm going to sit the fuck down and maybe play a video game or something for the rest of the day.